Standing outside my childhood home after 11 years, I felt my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The Christmas lights twinkled the same way they did when I was 17, but everything else had changed. The invitation from my mother came 3 weeks ago, a simple text that read, "Time for family to be together." I wondered if my sister Briana would even recognize me now. What she did not know was how drastically my life had transformed since that cold December night when she destroyed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that will touch your heart. Trust me, what happened next at that Christmas dinner table will leave you speechless. Let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in our small Ohio town life was never easy after Dad passed away from a heart attack when I was 12. Mom worked double shifts at the diner and cleaned office buildings at night just to keep food on our table. As the older sister, I became Brianna's second mother, helping her with homework, making her lunch, and walking her to school every morning before catching the late bus to my own classes. Brianna was 3 years younger and had Dad's bright blue eyes and infectious smile. Everyone adored her because she was naturally charming and never seemed to worry about anything. While I stressed over grades and college applications, she floated through life expecting things to work out perfectly. I sacrificed my social life to take care of her, turning down sleepovers and dates because someone needed to be home when Mom was working. Despite everything, I excelled in school and earned a full scholarship to Ohio State University. I planned to study business and finally escape the cycle of financial struggle that had defined our family since Dad's death. The acceptance letter felt like a golden ticket to a better future, not just for me, but potentially for our whole family. Everything changed when I was 15, and Mom married Roger Sullivan, a successful insurance salesman who owned a large colonial house on the better side of town. At first, it seemed like our prayers had been answered. No more worrying about rent or whether the electricity would get shut off. No more generic cereal and secondhand clothes. But Roger had strong opinions about how teenage girls should behave, and I apparently did not fit his vision of the perfect stepdaughter. He criticized everything about me, from my clothes, to my friends, to my part-time job at the local bookstore. He thought I was too independent, too outspoken, and a bad influence on Brianna. Meanwhile, he showered my sister with gifts and attention, taking her shopping for expensive clothes and electronics that Mom could never have afforded. Brianna blossomed under Roger's favoritism. She transformed from a sweet, slightly shy girl into someone who expected the world to revolve around her wants and needs. She developed expensive tastes and a sense of entitlement that made my stomach turn. When I pointed out how differently Roger treated us, Mom would sigh and say, I needed to be more grateful for the stability he provided. The tension in our house grew thicker every day. Roger made snide comments about my job, my college plans, and my refusal to call him Dad. He questioned every decision I made and treated me like I was some kind of delinquent just waiting to cause trouble. Brianna began parroting his criticisms, rolling her eyes when I talked about my dreams, and acting like I was embarrassing the family. Mom gradually pulled away from me too. She was so grateful to Roger for rescuing us from poverty that she overlooked his obvious favoritism. When I tried to talk to her about how isolated I felt, she would dismiss my concerns and tell me I was being dramatic. It became clear that keeping Roger happy was her top priority, even if it meant sacrificing her relationship with her eldest daughter. The breaking point came 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. I had been working extra shifts at the bookstore to save money for college expenses that my scholarship would not cover. Books, a laptop, dorm supplies, and all the little things that add up to thousands of dollars. Every penny mattered because I refused to ask Roger for help. That Friday night in December, I came home around 10:30 after closing the store. Snow was falling heavily, and I was exhausted from a long week of school and work. The house was unusually quiet when I walked in, but I could see lights on in the living room. I hung up my coat and headed toward the stairs, eager to fall into bed. Roger and Mom were waiting for me in the kitchen, their faces grim and angry. My stomach dropped immediately because I knew something was terribly wrong. Mom was holding her purse in her lap, and her eyes were red from crying. Roger stood behind her with his arms crossed, looking like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "Sit down, Chelsea," Mom said in a voice I had never heard before. "We need to talk." I remained standing, sensing danger in the air like an animal before a storm. "What is this about?" $200 is missing from my purse," Mom said quietly. "Briana saw you go through it this morning before school." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at them both in complete shock, unable to process what I was hearing. "What, I never touched your purse? Why would I steal from you?" "Briana was very specific about what she saw," Roger said coldly. "She said you were acting nervous and secretive. We checked your room and found this." He held up a $20 bill like it was evidence in a murder trial. "That is from my paycheck." I protested, my voice rising with panic and disbelief. "I can show you my pay stub. I have never stolen anything in my entire life." But I could see they had already made up their minds. Roger's face was stone cold with satisfaction, like he had been waiting for this moment to prove I was everything he claimed I was. Mom would not even look at me directly. "Where is Briana?" I demanded. "I want to hear her say this to my face." "She is staying at a friend's house tonight because she was too upset to be here," Mom said. "She felt terrible about having to tell us, but she could not keep lying to protect you." The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. My own sister, the girl I had sacrificed everything for, had fabricated a story that would destroy my life. I tried desperately to defend myself, explaining where every dollar in my possession had come from, begging them to call my boss to verify my work schedule and pay rate. Nothing mattered. Roger had convinced Mom that I was a thief and a liar, and my sister's false testimony was the final nail in my coffin. When I continued protesting my innocence, Roger exploded. "Enough," he shouted. "I will not have a criminal living under my roof corrupting this family any further. You need to pack your things and get out. Tonight." I turned to Mom, desperately praying she would stand up for me the way any mother should defend her child. Instead, she looked away and whispered, "Maybe it is for the best, Chelsea. Maybe you need to learn some independence." Those words shattered something inside me that has never fully healed. I was 17 years old, 2 months shy of graduation, and my own mother was abandoning me based on a lie. I ran upstairs and threw clothes into a duffel bag, while tears blurred my vision. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely zip the bag closed. When I came back downstairs, Roger handed me $50 like he was being generous. "This should get you started," he said, "and do not think about coming back here causing drama. We are done with your games." I walked out into the December snow with everything I owned in one bag and $50 to my name. Behind me, the warm lights of the house that was no longer my home grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely. I was utterly alone in the world, betrayed by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The first 2 weeks of my exile were the darkest period of my entire life. My best friend Sarah convinced her parents to let me sleep on their couch temporarily, but I knew I could not impose on their kindness for long. I spent my days at school pretending everything was normal, while my nights were filled with silent crying and desperate job hunting. I found work at Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour establishment frequented by truckers and night shift workers. The owner, Frank Murphy, was a gruff man in his 60s who asked no questions when I begged him for as many hours as he could give me. I worked breakfast shift before school came back for dinner rush, and often stayed until 2 in the morning cleaning and prepping for the next day. My hands became permanently stained with coffee and grease. I barely slept 4 hours a night, and my grades began to slip for the first time in my academic career. But I was earning enough money to rent a tiny basement room in Mrs. Chen's house for $250 a month. It was barely larger than a closet with no windows, and a ceiling so low I could touch it with my fingertips, but it was mine. Every night, I cried myself to sleep on a mattress I bought from a thrift store. I grieved not just for the family I had lost, but for the future that seemed to be slipping away. My college dreams felt impossible now that I was supporting myself entirely. The scholarship would cover tuition, but I needed money for everything else, and I was barely earning enough to survive. The pain of Briana's betrayal consumed me like acid in my veins. I replayed that morning over and over, trying to understand how my sweet little sister could fabricate such a devastating lie. She knew exactly how much I had sacrificed for her throughout our lives. She knew I would never steal from our mother. Yet she chose to destroy me anyway, and I could not comprehend why. Some nights I was tempted to call home and beg Mom to reconsider. My pride was the only thing that stopped me. If my own family could cast me out so easily based on lies, and without giving me a fair chance to defend myself, then maybe I was better off without them. That thought was both comforting and devastating at the same time. Everything changed 6 months later when I met Eleanor Patterson. She was a regular customer at Murphy's Diner who always ordered black coffee and wheat toast during her Tuesday morning business meetings. She was an elegant woman in her 50s who commanded respect without ever raising her voice. I noticed how other people deferred to her opinions and sought her advice on various matters. One particularly busy morning, the diner's computer system crashed right when Mrs. Patterson needed to show some important documents to a client. I quickly set up my laptop for her to use and helped her navigate the presentation software. She was impressed by my technical skills and asked about my background. When I explained that I was working multiple jobs while finishing high school, her expression grew thoughtful. She asked about my future plans, and I found myself opening up about my college dreams and the scholarship I might have to forfeit due to financial constraints. "Would you be interested in working for me part-time?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "I run a real estate company and could use someone with your work ethic and intelligence. The pay would be significantly better than what you are making here, and you would learn valuable business skills." I accepted her offer, immediately not fully understanding how dramatically it would change the trajectory of my life. Patterson Real Estate was a boutique firm specializing in luxury properties throughout Ohio. Mrs. Patterson taught me everything from basic office management to complex contract negotiations. She encouraged me to take online courses in business marketing and finance while working for her. Within 6 months, I was handling client communications and property showings. Mrs. Patterson became the mentor I never knew I needed, guiding my professional development while respecting my independence. She never asked about my family situation, but I sensed she understood I was on my own in ways most teenagers should not be. By my 19th birthday, I had earned my real estate license and was splitting commissions with Mrs. Patterson on properties I sold independently. My income increased dramatically as I developed relationships with wealthy clients who appreciated my dedication and attention to detail. I moved into a proper apartment and bought my first car, a used Honda that represented freedom and self-sufficiency. Mrs. Patterson eventually offered to make me a full partner in the business, recognizing that my youth and energy complemented her experience and established client base perfectly. Together we expanded into commercial real estate and property development. My natural talent for reading people and understanding their needs made me incredibly successful at matching clients with their dream properties. By 25, I had opened my own firm, Chelsea Patterson Real Estate, with Mrs. Patterson as my business partner and surrogate mother figure. We specialized in luxury residential properties and high-end commercial developments. My client list included doctors, lawyers, professional athletes, and business executives who trusted me with million-dollar transactions. Success brought financial security beyond anything I had ever imagined growing up. I purchased a penthouse apartment in downtown Columbus with floor-to-ceiling windows and designer furnishings. My walk-in closet held more expensive clothes than my mother had owned in her entire lifetime. I drove a pearl white BMW and wore jewelry that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Despite my wealth, I maintained a relatively private lifestyle. I had no interest in flaunting my success on social media or attending high society events just to be seen. The wounds from my family's rejection had taught me to value substance over appearance and genuine relationships over superficial connections. For 11 years, I deliberately avoided any contact with my family. I changed my phone number and moved frequently enough that they could not track me down. Occasionally, I would drive past my old high school or childhood neighborhood, but I never attempted to reach out. The pain of their abandonment had calcified into a protective wall around my heart. Mrs. Patterson urged me several times to consider reconciling with my family, arguing that harboring resentment was poisoning my ability to form lasting personal relationships. She was right, of course. My romantic relationships never progressed beyond a few months because I could not fully trust anyone with my vulnerable heart. But I was not ready to forgive people who had shown me so clearly that their love was conditional. 3 weeks before Christmas, I was reviewing contracts in my office when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short and simple. "Chelsea, this is Mom. I know it has been a long time, but I would love for you to join us for Christmas dinner. It is time for family to be together again. Please consider it. I miss you." I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart racing with a mixture of hope and anxiety I had not felt in years. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend I never received it. The other part, the little girl who still missed her mother's hugs, wanted desperately to believe that reconciliation was possible. After 3 days of internal debate, I responded with a simple, "I will be there." I did not know what to expect, but I needed closure with my past before I could fully embrace my future. If nothing else, I owed it to myself to see if my family was capable of genuine remorse and change. I spent the following weeks carefully planning my approach. I bought expensive gifts for everyone: a designer handbag for Mom, a luxury watch for Roger, and diamond earrings for Briana. However, I decided not to reveal the extent of my financial success immediately. I wanted to see if they would accept me as a person before they knew about my wealth. Christmas Eve arrived gray and cold with snow falling steadily as I drove through the familiar streets of my hometown. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, from the houses to the shopping centers to the high school, where I had once believed my dreams were impossible to achieve. I parked outside the colonial house where I had spent the most painful years of my adolescence. Through the front windows, I could see the warm glow of Christmas lights and the silhouettes of people moving around inside. My hands were trembling as I gathered my gifts and walked up the sidewalk where Roger had once told me never to return. Mom answered the door before I could even ring the bell. She looked older, with gray streaking her brown hair and fine lines around her eyes that spoke of worry and regret. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the threshold of forgiveness. "Chelsea," she whispered, and then she was hugging me tightly, tears flowing down both our faces. "I am so sorry, baby. I am so very sorry for everything." Roger appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable but attempting a smile. "Chelsea, welcome home. You look successful." Briana emerged from the living room, and I almost did not recognize her. She was still beautiful, but there was a hardness around her eyes that had not been there in our youth. She was dressed expensively and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. "Well, well," Briana said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence after all these years." Dinner conversation started awkwardly, but gradually became more natural as we caught up on basic life details. I mentioned that I worked in real estate, but kept my responses vague when they asked about specifics. Briana dominated most of the conversation, talking extensively about her job as a marketing coordinator for a small firm and her boyfriend Marcus, who apparently came from a wealthy family. "Marcus and I are looking at houses in the Riverside district," Briana announced proudly. "Nothing too extravagant, just a starter home in the 300,000 range. Not everyone can afford luxury right away, but we are doing well for people our age." She kept steering the conversation toward money and success, making subtle comparisons between her stable life and what she assumed was my struggling existence. I noticed her eyeing my clothes and purse, trying to assess their value and quality. "So, Chelsea," Roger interjected during dessert, "what exactly do you do in real estate? Are you an assistant or something?" "I am a broker," I replied simply. "I help people buy and sell properties." Briana laughed, a sound with sharp edges. "That must be tough in this economy. I imagine you have to work really hard just to make ends meet. Real estate can be so unpredictable." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt my patience beginning to fray. This was the same superior attitude she had developed as a teenager, except now it was wrapped in adult sophistication and passive-aggressive concern. "It has its challenges," I admitted, refusing to take the bait. As we moved to the living room for coffee, Brianna's commentary became more pointed. She talked about her expensive vacation plans, her designer clothes, and Marcus's family money, with the clear intention of highlighting what she perceived as the gap between our lifestyles. Finally, as we were exchanging gifts, Briana delivered her devastating blow with surgical precision. "You know what everyone," she announced loudly, her voice carrying the fake sweetness I remembered from our teenage years. "Let us be honest here. Chelsea probably cannot even afford a decent Christmas gift for anyone. I mean, look at her situation, still struggling after all these years." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fireplace. Mom looked mortified, and Roger shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But Briana was not finished with her performance. "I feel terrible that we are all sitting here talking about our successes when poor Chelsea is obviously having such a hard time making ends meet. It must be so embarrassing for her to see how well the rest of us are doing. Maybe she came here hoping we could help her out financially." She delivered this speech with the theatrical concern of someone who wanted to appear compassionate while actually delivering a public humiliation. It was masterfully cruel, designed to position me as a charity case while elevating her own status as the successful sister. "Briana, that is enough," Mom said quietly, but the damage was already done. The familiar pain of rejection and betrayal flooded through me exactly as it had that night 11 years ago, when this same sister had lied to destroy my life. But this time, I was not a powerless 17-year-old girl with no options and no voice. This time, I had something to say. I set down my coffee cup very carefully and reached into my Hermes purse, which Briana had clearly not recognized despite its $12,000 price tag. I pulled out my business cards and placed them on the coffee table where everyone could see them clearly. "You want honesty, Briana?" I said calmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Let me give you some honesty." I handed a business card to each person in the room. The elegant cream-colored cardstock read, "Chelsea Patterson, CEO, Patterson Real Estate Group," in raised gold lettering. "I am not struggling." I continued, pulling out my phone and opening my banking app. "I am the owner and CEO of the largest luxury real estate firm in Central Ohio. Last month alone, I closed $4 million worth of property sales." The silence in the room was deafening. Roger's face had gone completely pale while Mom stared at the business card like she could not believe what she was seeing. Briana's mouth was hanging open in shock. I pulled up my recent sales certificates on my phone and passed it around the room. "These are just from the last 6 weeks. A $2.3 million estate in Dublin, a $1.7 million penthouse downtown, a commercial property worth $3.8 million. "That is impossible," Briana whispered, her voice cracking. "You were working at a diner when you left here. You had nothing." "I had something you never gave me credit for," I replied. "I had determination and work ethic and intelligence. Everything I needed to build a successful life, despite the fact that my own family threw me away like garbage." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the same street where I had once stood, with a duffel bag and $50 abandoned and heartbroken. When I turned back to face them, my composure was perfectly intact. For 11 years, I have built a business empire from nothing. I own a penthouse worth more than this entire neighborhood. I drive a car that costs more than most people's annual salaries. I have investments and properties across 3 states, and my net worth is something you could not even comprehend. Roger attempted to speak, but I held up my hand to silence him. But do you know what the most successful part of my life has been? I continued. Learning that I did not need any of you to be happy. Learning that family is not about blood relations, but about people who support you unconditionally. Mrs. Patterson became more of a mother to me than you ever were, I said, looking directly at Mom. And she did it without expecting me to sacrifice my dignity or my truth. Briana suddenly burst into tears, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. I am so sorry, Chelsea. I lied about the money. I took it myself to buy clothes and makeup, and I was afraid I would get in trouble, so I blamed you. I was jealous because you were always the smart one, the one everyone praised. I wanted to hurt you, but I never thought they would actually kick you out. Her confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud. After 11 years of believing I was a criminal, my family was finally hearing the truth they should have believed from the beginning. The vindication felt hollow compared to the years of pain her lie had caused. You destroyed my life because you were jealous, I asked quietly. You let them throw me out in the snow because you wanted some makeup and could not face the consequences of your own actions. I was 14, Briana sobbed. I was just a kid who made a terrible mistake. And I was 17, I replied. Just a kid who lost everything because no one cared enough to believe her. Roger cleared his throat awkwardly. Chelsea, I owe you an enormous apology. I was completely wrong about you, and I am ashamed of how I treated you. If I could take it back. But you cannot, I said simply. None of you can take back the years I spent believing my family did not love me enough to trust me. You cannot take back the nights I cried myself to sleep in a basement room, working myself to exhaustion just to survive. Mom was crying silently, holding my business card like it was a sacred artifact. I failed you, she whispered. I was your mother, and I failed to protect you when you needed me most. I will never forgive myself for that. For a moment, looking at their faces filled with genuine remorse and shame, I felt the familiar pull of family loyalty that had once defined my entire identity. Part of me wanted to collapse into Mom's arms and pretend the last 11 years had been a bad dream. But I had learned too much about myself and about real love to accept such a simple resolution. Trust once broken so completely could not be repaired with apologies and tears alone. I forgive you, I said finally, and I meant it. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying anger and resentment has poisoned enough years of my life. I forgive you so that I can be free of this pain once and for all. I gathered my purse and coat, preparing to leave. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending this never happened, or that we can just pick up where we left off. It means I choose not to let your betrayal define my future anymore. As I walked toward the door, Mom caught my arm gently. Will we ever see you again? I paused, considering the question honestly. Maybe. But not as the daughter who desperately needed your approval and acceptance. That girl died the night you threw her away. The woman standing here now has learned to love herself enough that she does not need anyone else's permission to exist. I drove home through the quiet Christmas night, feeling lighter than I had in years. The confrontation had not gone as I expected, but it had given me something more valuable than revenge or dramatic victory. It had given me closure, and the final confirmation that I had built a life worth living entirely on my own terms. The next morning I called Mrs. Patterson to thank her for the Christmas gift she had given me 11 years ago, though she had not realized it at the time. She had shown me what real family looked like, people who believed in your potential, supported your dreams, and loved you, not because they had to, but because they chose to. My phone buzzed with messages from Mom and Briana over the following weeks, asking for another chance to be part of my life. I responded politely, but kept my boundaries firm. Some relationships can be healed with time and effort, but others are better honored by letting them remain in the past, where they belong. The greatest lesson I learned from that Christmas dinner was not about forgiveness or family, or even about the satisfaction of proving my worth to people who had doubted me. It was about the incredible power that comes from knowing your own value, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes it. Success is not just about money or professional achievement. It is about building a life so authentic and fulfilling that you no longer need validation from people who once made you feel small. Sometimes the family that chooses you matters more than the one you were born into. And sometimes being kicked out at 17 is not the end of your story, but the beginning of discovering who you were always meant to become. I hope this story resonates with anyone who has ever felt abandoned or betrayed by the people closest to them. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a devastating betrayal? How did you find the strength to forgive without forgetting? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity and finding your true strength. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by how others treat them. Thank you so much for listening, and remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply living a life so beautiful and authentic that the opinions of those who hurt you become irrelevant. Wishing you all the courage to choose yourself even when others choose to walk away.